Let's talk about the economy. You were a proponent of the fair tax. Are you still?
Very much so. I think more than ever, the fair tax is looking really palatable to Americans who say we've got to get rid of the IRS. It's been a criminal enterprise, trampling over the rights of citizens. It's a one-stop shop for going after people, investigating people, finding a point of guilt, and then punishing people all in one place. It goes against the very nature of our jurisprudence system. But I think more importantly, why should we punish people for their productivity, which is what the current tax system does? Now, when I hear people say, let's get rid of the IRS, fine, how are you going to do it? The only way to do it is to have a consumption tax. We get taxed for what we buy, not for what we produce and make. And that's one of the key elements that make the fair tax very attractive. Great way to bring jobs, specifically manufacturing jobs, back to America. Helps poor people get on the next rung of the ladder up, not down. And I think the more people learn about the fair tax, the more they will embrace it.
So the criticisms of it are it's an additional national sales tax, it's a windfall tax cut for the rich, and that poor people take it on the chin with a national sales tax.
When people say that, they clearly don't understand how the fair tax works, because the opposite is true. Helps the people in the bottom third of the economy the most. They're the ones who benefit most by the fair tax, because the element of the prebate in the fair tax essentially untaxes poor people from their basic necessities. For the first time in their lives, they get their entire paycheck. Most Americans, when they look at their paycheck, they say, okay, here's my gross, and then after the government takes out all these things, takes this money away from me, this is what I have left. When an American gets the entire paycheck and they say, I don't want to pay a lot of taxes, then don't buy something new at the retail level. Buy something used, or hold your powder. The people who are at the top of the economy, they will benefit the least from the fair tax. They have the most money, they buy the most expensive things. But here's the thing, people living in the underground economy now, prostitutes, pimps, gamblers, drug dealers who don't pay taxes because they don't file the returns, they're going to pay taxes because they buy things. Everybody will pay. That's why it's called a fair tax. But the people in the bottom really aren't going to be taxed because the prebate untaxes their necessities. So it's the opposite of this idea that it's unfair.
You're going to have to spend some time explaining it to the American people.
Well, any tax reform will have to be explained, but this is not just a reform. This isn't tinkering with the tax code. This is throwing out the 77,000-page monstrosity that everybody hates. This is turning April 15th into another beautiful spring day in America. And it's giving people the power to determine just how much tax they're going to pay. Most importantly, it takes the government and the government's nose out of people's business. You're not going to be saying to the government, here's how much I made, here's what I gave, here's what I spent. What business of it is the government to have all this information on file for every American?
You obviously tout Texas' economic strength. Have you heard the argument that that is not because of you, that was not tied to your conservative leadership?
Well, I don't think any one individual gets credit for the state of Texas. I think it goes back to there's a philosophy that we put into place for the last 14 years that I certainly had a central role in, whether it was putting tax policies into place, whether it was making sure that we had the most sweeping tort reform in the nation, or whether it was the regulatory climate that we put into place, and the educational progress that we made. All of those go back to our legislative focus and the ability for Democrats and Republicans to come together and put Texas on a particular track that has been, I think, inarguably the most successful state in the nation from an economic standpoint. And that's one of the things I believe in, is that states need to compete against each other. We need to have leadership in Washington, D.C. that respects those states and devolves that power back to the states so that they can compete against each other. We're a very diverse country, and people are going to migrate to where they're most comfortable. Over the last decade, they've migrated to Texas in record numbers. Over 5.6 more people on our population rolls today than in 2000.
Are there blue and red state models for economic growth?
Well, of course.
I mean, do you think Texas is the model the nation should be?
I think there are principles that will work anywhere. if you don't overtax, you don't overregulate, you don't overlitigate, and you have accountable public schools, so you've got a skilled workforce, that'll even work in California. But you have to have the courageous men and women that will implement those policies. That's the difference. And absolutely, there are red states. When I look at South Carolina, when I look at Florida, when I look at Louisiana, those states are prospering because they basically are putting those policies into place. States that want to overtax and overregulate and overlitigate, they're not doing as well. And that's the point that I try to make, is that people go to where they're most comfortable. There may be people that want to live in states that have high tax burdens, have a heavy regulatory burden, but if they don't, they can pack up and leave and go somewhere else. And that's what we've seen happen over this last decade. A lot of folks have moved to the state of Texas for just that reason. They're in pursuit of freedom.